welcome, Emily. It's such a joy for us to have you here. Emily MAITLIS, barely needs any introduction unless you don't own a TV set or have no interest in current news, which would be quite strange at the moment. But so Emily, front of Newsnight, you're sort of the filter for most of us on what's happening with Brexit at the moment. No easy task. It's been, even amongst that, it's been a very dramatic week. I was just wondering, what's your take on this Supreme Court, the argument about language? It's like a sort of soup of analysis and the stories for you.
Yeah, I have to say, this is already my favourite festival in the world. I think that every festival should start with a sort of, a run around a stately home that you can point to your bedroom at and then say, I'm going for a swim in a scandalous pool. That's made my day already, so whatever happens next. But yes, I think, I think it's probably helpful if I spend a moment telling you everything I understand about British politics right now.
Yes, that would be marvellous.
Thank you very much. I'll see you later. The trouble with using superlatives, and we have to be really careful on Newsnight, is that whatever you say one night gets trumped by whatever happens the next night. So you have to be really careful that you don't just launch into unprecedented or the most extraordinary, because you sort of do that on a Monday night and then things get more intense on a Tuesday night, and by Wednesday night you've got your head in your hands. And so I think that has led to a really strong focus on language. And I think one thing that's become very clear to me is that a lot of this is quite deliberate. I think there is an infantilization of our political language right now, which is
deliberately.
Yes, I think it's been done. I think it's been done very cleverly. I covered the Trump campaign quite intensively,
yes.
And one of the cleverest things that Donald Trump did during that lead up of the sort of 12 months was the nickname. And it's sometimes overlooked, but actually a nickname is an absolutely brilliant piece of political sort of machismo, because you put people instantly in a box that is very easy for your supporters and voters to carry on using. So once you say Crooked Hillary or Lying Ted, or, his best one of all for Elizabeth Warren was Pocahontas, it was just sort of genius. You've enabled your supporters to find a very useful tool with which to sort of choose their side. And I think when you come across things like, the Incredible Hulk, for example.
Yeah, right.
It's a dream for copywriters and for people designing the front page and for columnists and all the rest of it. We get to go, yay, he's given us the Incredible Hulk. And so actually that becomes the mail front page, and it's green and it's funny, and everyone goes, yay, Incredible Hulk. And what it does is it delivers something that people can use, just like these 3-word slogans, and it's on both sides. It's Labour saying people before privilege. I mean, what does that mean? Where does privilege start? Where does people start? Whether it's Labour using that kind of language, or whether it's Boris Johnson, the Conservatives, using, take back control, or people versus the Parliament is the one that we're going with now. I think I call it infantilization, because you're basically handing people a tool that they can use to stop thinking, right? And that's what you're doing. Nuance is lost now. It's a really difficult
It's just alliteration.
It's alliteration, and so actually, when you have a Supreme Court ruling, and then you go, as I think the BBC did, to Stoke or somewhere, and you ask people in the middle of a Stoke shopping centre what they think of the Supreme Court ruling. I mean, God knows, people in the shopping centre in Stoke are probably not sitting there going, I wonder what the Supreme Court ruling is going to deliver now. I wonder whether it's going to be unanimous and whether it was justiciable. They might be, but, there's a good chance that they weren't thinking that when they went off to their shopping centre in Stoke, on that particular morning. And so people use whatever they think they've heard, and they'll say, get on with it. Now, as we all know, get on with it is a very simple, direct instruction which cannot be carried out simply. We know how difficult it is to do the get on with it. We know how difficult it is to say clean break Brexit. We know how difficult it is to say, you know, stop the coup. All these things are sort of given this really deliciously sort of simple, and I call it sort of infantilized language, to make things look easy when they're not. They're not,
Yes.
you know. This is a really rambling answer.
No,
but
it's fascinating. So then we're back to the question, I suppose, of having a referendum, which was simple binary choice. And does it come from that, or does it come from a sort of Twitter sphere reduction, you know, attention? You know, or is it just sort of everyone's so polarised they don't really have time for the arguments now? It's just for or against, and as you say, that's become...
Well, I think the referendum was sort of carelessly planned. We said yes or no. We didn't explain what no looked like. We didn't have a threshold. You know, I'm going over stuff that is not new. It's been said before. It would have been easier if we'd known at what point you changed and what no looked like. And actually, if all the people who told us that no meant leaving the single market and leaving the European Court of Human Rights and the ECJ and all the rest of it, if they're to be believed, then no was no to all of that, you know. So I can sort of see both sides. But I think clearly the clashes between, as we know, you know, representative democracy and populist democracy, and whether we still want our MPs to deliver their wisdom and their understanding, whether we think of them as the people that are going to bring us a wider understanding of democracy rather than a populist yes or no. And I think what's happening at the moment, which is fascinating, is it's all right, it's fine when you set up people versus parliament. You know, how easy. It's ridiculous because we know that the parliament and, you know, to some extent the executive have been chosen by the people. But it's all very well saying, OK, do you want people versus the parliament? Then what happens? You know, then you have the election. Then you have a whole new parliament. And what do people say? Oh, we hate parliament, because they've learned that they hate parliament. So even if you had a Conservative majority, you know, even if you had an overwhelming... What's to stop everyone going, yeah, but remember it's people versus parliament. We hate parliament because we've been taught we hate parliament now. And so you've actually created this mob monster that's not... It's not going to go away. You land these phrases in the hope that you're solving one problem and you're creating a whole different one. So I think that's where, you know, the more you try and simplify things in areas that are not simple, that are deeply complicated, the more you're basically asking for trouble down the road.
Sure. So there's a monster that's been unleashed by this very simply phrased question. So it's people you decide, then it turns out they can't decide because it's too complicated, but that's after the event.
Well,
right?
I think the referendum thing was a really interesting one. What we know now, what we understand now is that, you know, David Cameron, you know, as he said, he thought he could win things. He was good at winning referendums. He was good at winning AV. He was good at winning Scotland against all the odds. He then won in 2015. And actually, it's a bit like watching a sort of, you know, a casino. You sort of think you're on a streak. And you're like, okay. I've got this, you know.
So you think it's a referendum that's a good idea as long as the result goes one way?
I think he was always planning. My understanding is that he was planning for a Conservative cabinet that would, you know, exist after the referendum. So, for example, when we invited, guests for interviews during the referendum campaign, he never wanted to have blue on blue, you know, what we call Conservatives versus Conservatives, because he was like, oh, you know, I want to keep my cabinet together. That's so long ago now, the idea that not only could he keep his, you know, he couldn't keep his cabinet together, he couldn't keep his party together, and he can't keep the country together. And yet there was that sense of, you know, this is just going to be out of the way and then we're going to move on.
You're right, that feels like ancient history now. And I'm talking of which, you had the ultimate blue on blue when you did the who's going to be the next leader of the party debate, and you know everybody must have watched that, and love to hear your take from behind the scenes. I mean, it was incredibly, you know, tense viewing for everybody, and the questions and we've got unbelievable presence of mind and poise to even get through it. But how was it for you, and how did these people behave when they're not being filmed? And
well,
can
it
we
was
have
really
your-
funny. I mean, I call my book is Airhead, and its subtitle is The Imperfect Art of News, because the one thing I'd say is that most of the stuff that happens on air is sort of, you know, chaos and coincidence and the stuff that you never expect to happen, and that's sometimes sort of not revealed in the product you watch. And so I wanted to write a whole sort of behind the scenes of this is what really went on. And the debate was a classic example of where I think we went out of our way to make it as hard for ourselves as possible. And so we decided that we would have this debate on the Tuesday night. And I think it was partly because, you know, it was to do with the voting that the Conservatives themselves had arranged and the party had arranged.
That's right, it was mid.
It was mid, but also, and it was to do with Channel 4, and we didn't want to clash with them and the next ones. And so what we did was we said, okay, we're going to go on air. I think it was like 7:30 or 8 o'clock or something. And we didn't actually get that round of votes until 6:15 that evening. And so we had spent a day trying to prep for something without knowing how many people would be in it, who would be in it, which order they'd be speaking in. And it was, looking back on it, it was a sort of extraordinary thing to do. We were like, right, let's put out 4 chairs. And then somebody would go, yeah, there might be 6 of them. Yeah, no, you're right, there might be 6 of them. So where are we going to put Rory Stewart? Okay, well, should we put Rory? No, but he might not be in it. Oh, God, yeah, he might not be in it. So what about Dominic Raab? Should we have Dominic Raab there and Rory Stewart? No, but Dominic Raab might not be in it. And so you were trying to sort of, and we literally sort of, we role play all these things. You be Dominic Raab and you be Michael Gove and you be Boris Johnson. But what if Boris Johnson does a no-show at the last minute because we didn't know for certain that he was going to show up and we thought he was going to show up. So you've got all these, it's literally like the sort of the balls in the air thing. And then we normally have a live audience, you know, for these sort of things. And I said, why aren't we having a live audience? A live audience gives you that sort of, you know, fillip and a lift, and it sort of, it tells you where people's heads are. And they're like, no, because a live audience, you know, you've got to go through everyone and be very specific.
So who decides that sort of thing? Is it a group thing, or is the producer saying, no, we're not having a live audience?
Well, it's a sort of, you know,
sort of
I
like,
suppose you'd call it the Politburo, you
right?
know, but it's a sort of, it's you know, no, it's a sort of collection of people who, you know, sort of plan the whole thing. Anyway, we didn't have a live audience for all the right reasons, in the sense that we thought, you know, you'd have to sort of vet everyone and work out balance and work out fairness and work out party allegiances and all the rest of it. Yeah. And actually, what ended up happening was this extraordinary thing where, you know, we went on air having more people than we'd envisaged. I think there were 5 when we'd been predicting 4. And one of the people that, you know, I had my first question sort of all ready to Dominic Raab, who was going to be on my left, and it's, oh, wait, no, you've been knocked out. Right, okay, so, you know, got no question for you. And actually, and then some of the questions that came from the audience in the end were quite, you know, badly discredited, not from, you know, the work that our teams had done. But
Twitter had been taken down of the guy who asked. I mean, that was all sort of...
So, but actually, the funny thing is, when I look back on that, I think actually that set the whole debate that we saw. What I remember is people, you know, sort of filibustering answers, not wanting to... There was an extraordinary moment for me where I was sort of, I think I was talking to Boris Johnson, and he just carried on not listening and sort of talking straight down the line. And it was... And it's an extraordinary thing to watch close up. And funny enough, David Cameron had said this to me. He said, oh, you know, they've all come to me for sort of, you know, guidance on how to do the debates. And I've told them just, you know, don't talk to the moderator and ignore, you know, the other.
So he told them to ignore you.
He basically said, he was like, don't listen to the question. Just carry on talking. Just talk to camera.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, thanks, Dave. That's really helpful. And then, of course, because I was on the left, I sort of saw this.
Yeah, it was like watching a horse.
It was so bizarre. It was sort of so I was sort of saying, can you hear me? Because there was this sort of moment where he was just like, rah, 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 and it wasn't it was just the fact it looked like he hadn't heard, and he was sort of talking straight over. And And then there was this whole strange thing. I mean, if I told you that the moment that Rory Stewart took off his tie, I never even noticed it. It was like,
you didn't notice?
No, you know when you do those optical illusion things where they say how many basketballs have the players put in the thing, and there's a gorilla running through the back. Have you ever done those things where they show you the thing and everyone's like, oh, you counted 7 basketballs, but did you see the gorilla? The gorilla
Did you miss the gorilla?
I never saw the gorilla, and I was like, where was I? But actually, what I think looking back was that set exactly the tone, actually, that it's very hard to get answers out of our Prime Minister. It's very hard to have anything that feels like I'm asking you this and you're listening and you're responding. I haven't heard any interviews yet. I haven't heard many interviews yet that deliver a response to a question. I know that sounds incredibly basic, but that's my sense.
Which is always the problem with politicians, though, isn't it? They're incredibly good at not answering a question. I mean, but in a sense, isn't this particular Brexit debate is quite good for that? Haven't you said somewhere, like, this has sort of forced people into actually saying things, even when they might usually, perhaps not in the case of the Prime Minister.
Well, yeah, I mean, it depends what you mean by incredibly good at. I think we're all getting tired of it, aren't we?
Yeah.
You know, I'm getting tired of it. I'll tell you what happens in my life now, honestly, is that virtually anything that people in positions of authority say to me on air, on camera, is almost always not true. And all the true stuff, well, what I mean is that...
Do you mean actually not true, or just avoiding the issue, or
I mean
just sort of...
that people say things on camera that they tend quite often not to believe. And then as soon as the cameras stop rolling, they tell you what they really think. Right? Yeah, we're fucked. We're not going to get the vote through.
Oh!
You know, I swear to you, I've had conversations where you're like, so you're not going to get this vote through, you haven't got the numbers. Well, Emily, I'd ask you to be a little bit more optimistic, and I trust in the Prime Minister, and I really genuinely think, and I don't understand how you know that, and we from all we've heard, we've got a very good chance. And then the camera stops, and I go, so how much are you going to lose by? And they go, yeah, 40, 50. You know, I swear to you, I get WhatsApps, I get messages from people that tell me what they really think. There was a classic one. You might remember my colleague, political editor Nick Watt, who was just told by a member of the cabinet during the withdrawal of treatment. He was like, "What happens next? What happens next?" Yeah. And the cabinet secretary just gone, "Fuck knows." You know? And he came on air, and because we're a post 10:30 programme, and he has this lovely sort of boyish, bubbly kind of, ebullient personality, and he really sounds very serious. And he said, so I was talking to one cabinet minister, Emily, and this cabinet minister said, and he reads this note, "Fuck knows, we're all doomed." You know, he even had it made into a T-shirt, because that was the moment at which you're like, I've just understood. If I want to learn anything, I'm going to text you. I'm going to WhatsApp you. I'm going to talk to you as soon as the cameras have stopped rolling. But everything that you say on air, not everything. I mean, I don't want to be like, I'm not at all saying that, everyone's a liar. I'm just saying that there is this quality now where people feel in positions of authority that they're saying the line that they don't believe and that you know not to be true. And the trouble for us is that where is the duty to our audience then? Where is the point at which we say, I have to signal to the audience that I don't want to be complicit with the people that I know don't believe what they're saying.
Right.
I want to be in the place where I'm on the audience's side saying, really? Because otherwise, we're all part of this gang, and that's the problem. I don't want to be part of the Westminster gang. I don't want to be part of the, yes, I know, but actually you're going to say 40 people in a moment, and the whole cover's going to be blown.
Well, I suppose they're trying to avoid the career-ending moment, aren't they, where they say the wrong thing, and everyone goes, what the heck did you say that? And that's it, which does happen, doesn't it, broadcasting and politics, but then you're left in this sort of...
Yes, and I think, I genuinely believe there are excellent people. There are excellent politicians doing excellent work at the moment. But I think one or two are having a very serious trouble with backbone, And I think that I'm saying the obvious, right? There are people who are uncomfortable in the positions that they've had to adopt, but they love their ministerial cars, And I think that's going to be, it's going to be a problem. There are going to be people who I think will probably end up, leaving or or sort of working out that they can't do it.
They can't take it, or they don't know what to do with it now they've got it, or...
Look, I don't know.
Sure.
I think it's very hard, because I think there are genuinely good people, genuinely trying to find compromises and genuinely trying to find paths through. But occasionally you just sort of think, I don't know if you believe that. And if you don't believe that, then how on earth are you going to take me with you? How on earth are you going to persuade the country that this is in our best interest? Because you don't seem to believe what you're saying either.
So they'll be much more honest when the cameras aren't rolling. I mean, what you do brilliantly in your book. But just to go to that lead up, I think everybody wants to sort of get behind the scenes with you. How were they with each other? Say at that leaders' debate. Was there a difference? If the camera, are they kind of...
Funny enough, you always remember, Jeremy Hunt was the one who thanked the crew.
Oh.
And you always remember things like that. So Jeremy Hunt was the one person who thanked me and thanked the crew. Rory and Sajid had a group hug, which was lovely. And they were kind of, they sort of, I think they did a sort of, oh, come in, but it was just those two. Anyways, and... And what I remember most, funny enough, I've written a sort of chapter for this in the paperback, was...
oh, have you? Okay,
there was a moment when the big debate was about chairs versus podiums. And normally you have a sort of a podium for this kind of thing, and I think someone had decided that we were going to do chairs. I don't know what the sort of thinking was. And so they each came along and they started doing this thing of like, oh gosh, oh, how do I sit? Oh gosh, do I sit like this? Do I sit? Oh, where do I sit? And it was quite weird for me, because I sort of felt like I was the person working in the sort of dreams bed shop. You know what I mean? When they were sort of all bouncing up and down and going, oh gosh, do I sit back or do I lean forward? And then I sort of felt, that typically because I was the only woman, I was like, oh God, do I have to sort of make them feel okay with the soft furnishings? Right. Like, I don't want to do that. I just want to get my head around the questions, and I want to know where I'm going, and I want to make sure I know where everyone's eyeline is. I don't want to be sort of reassuring people that they look good in profile, or that they, their legs go. And of course, the guys sort of like, do I do this? Do I do this? And so I suddenly felt myself sort of deeply underqualified to comment on how they should be sitting on the chairs and whether it should be sort of forward or back. And actually, as I was, a good friend of mine afterwards, Hannah, I sort of said, what was it about that? And she said, well, actually, when you're sitting in a chair, you have a heated sort of argument, and when you're at a podium, you sort of stick in your silos. And I wonder whether that had an impact on how much, they were sort of talking over or whatever. I don't know whether people would have just felt more comfortable at a...
Oh, because they were kind of studious. I mean, there was a great big conspiracy theory afterwards, wasn't there? Why have they put the Tories on these awkward seats or whatever? Some people thought that was like a kind of BBC.
No, do you know what? As I write in the book, most things are sort of cock up, not conspiracy. There was no. I think it was just that we had these really lovely white chairs, and we thought it looked glamorous, and we had a sort of studio that fitted the white chairs.
Yes.
And so I think that was the sort of, that was the idea behind it. But maybe it was. You never want people to be uncomfortable. It's the opposite. You want people to be comfortable, because actually, that's when you're sort of putting people at ease, and you're hopefully, getting their best performance.
Sure.
But I do remember that being a sort of bizarre, sort of extra moment that was somehow fell on me to explain. And I was like, I'm not sure I'm qualified for this. I've never seen the chairs before in my life.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thrilled you've written about that in the paperback. I mean, this is something you could carry on writing. What Emily's done in her brilliant book, Airhead, is sort of take us right behind the scenes. And there's lots of stories of you from the field and, in America. And will you just tell us a bit about your Trump and Clinton experiences? Because your, knowledge of politics is properly international. And a lot of what you say now, it reminds me of the stuff you've written about the White House, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I wanted to do in the book was, I think that television sort of snapshots everything, and so people only see the end product. You sort of see the interview that made it onto air, but you don't see all the ones that got away, or the sort of the bits that led to disaster. I mean, even last week, before I get onto this, it was we had this amazing session, the sort of panel session, and we'd booked. I won't sort of say the names, but let's say we'd booked somebody who was called Roger, panelist, Brexiteer, big figure, sort of well-known, sort of give us a good sort of argument. And in my ear, as we're going on air, my editor goes, Roger's not turned up. And I go, oh dear, oh God, oh dear. Are we still trying to get him? And there's like, another Roger's turned up. And you're like, what? We booked the wrong Roger. Right. So, because we try really hard for balance. So the Roger the Brexiteer who hasn't turned up, is the other Roger also Brexiteer? We don't know. Right. So does the other Roger have a view on any of the questions that we were sort of going to ask? We're not sure. Just feel your way in this, won't you? Yeah. And actually, the wrong Roger never knew he was the wrong Roger. And so there are these moments where you sort of think, okay, this is all just about, it's the swan thing. Your legs are doing that, and you're sort of trying to glide, and you don't want to offend anyone, and you don't want to get mad with anyone, and you're sort of trying to deliver that. Yeah. And so that's a lot of what I write about in the book. And it's also about the sort of the quandaries that you have. So one of the most, for me, fascinating sort of interactions was with Clinton a few years ago, President Bill Clinton. And I got invited to this sort of amazing, a trip to Jaipur to go and interview him. And it was all these things, are slight sort of compromises. Go and talk about the global initiative, go and talk about the Clinton Foundation in the middle of Jaipur. It was we had to do 2 days of sightseeing with him, which sounds sort of amazing, kind of amazing. But it was in July in Delhi, in a bakery. And it was the hottest I've ever been in my life. I was sort of in this a sort of chapati-making bakery, and you were just watching these chapatis come out, and I was sort of dripping and melting and dripping and melting. Because it was all about the sort of encouraging new businesses. It was all the things, and then he sort of went off and served school dinners, and it was it's a sort of amazing to see India like this, and to see Clinton up close, and he was sort of amazed. He lost a lot of weight, obviously, from the sort of days when he was in power, and he sort of seemed to carry it all off quite easily, and we were just sort of sitting there dripping, and that night we got taken up to the Amer Fort at sunset, and it's the most extraordinary thing. You sometimes have to sort of pinch yourself, and we were shown round. They sort of shut the whole thing except for the president's kind of lot and us. And we were going to have dinner up here at sunset, and we got shown round the Maharani's palace and the bedroom, and Bill, I sort of find myself
Who's we?
with
What,
him.
you, Bill?
It was my crew, who was three of us, cameraman, producer, and me, and sort of Clinton's gathering, and then a few local dignitaries and stuff. And we're walking through the Maharani's bedroom, and Bill Clinton's got this little candle, and he kind of shines it up, and he shows me, the reflections that it makes on the sort of patterns. And I get this sort of giggle, and I'm like, Bill Clinton's showing me mirrors on a bedroom wall. And so I sort of can't quite get that behind me. And then I think, grow up, Emily, grow up, stop it. Talk about Genghis Khan, to show you understand, get all this. And so later that evening, we sort of got back after the dinner, and me sort of thinking, I've got to tell somebody this. We go for a cocktail in the hotel. And there's this really lovely gift shop, which I'm feeling weird about, because obviously you've just sort of seen India at its most sort of, developing, and you've seen a lot of poverty, and I'm thinking, I shouldn't really be looking in the gift shop, but there's a really lovely pashmina. And so I pop into the gift shop, and I'm kind of going through the cashmere and the pashmina and having a little look, and then in he pops, right? And I'm thinking, oh, this is really embarrassing. He's not going to be looking at cashmere pashminas, and I don't want to be seen. And so I sort of wrap myself in this pashmina like this, sort of as if I've somehow adapted a rather local sort of, girl in the corner. And I'm sort of spying out the corner of my eye, and sure enough, he's not going for the Taj Mahal lighters, He goes straight for the books, and I think, okay, of course, erudite Bill Clinton. He's going to be reading about Genghis Khan and the Mughals and empire and development. And then I sort of see this book he's picked up, and I'm like, oh, that doesn't look like a history book. And then I sort of look a bit further, and I'm like, oh, slightly familiar. Oh, it's the Kama Sutra. And it was like very traditional, lovely Indian cultural choice. I've got to get out this gift shop now. I've got to tell somebody. So there were sort of moments like which were sort of pure comedy behind the scenes. But then there was also the questions that were going through my head. And this was 2014, which was before the Me Too movement and before the Weinstein movement. And it happened to chime with a time that Monica Lewinsky had written in Vanity Fair about what had happened to her 20 years ago. And she used this beautiful phrase that had really stuck with me. And she said, the whole thing had been consensual. That she had no, beef with that. But she said, I sometimes think that the women in these imbroglios do not recover their lives so easily. And it was a sort of really poignant phrase. And here I was about to meet President Clinton, and it was all about women. That was the thing. It was about women and women in India and women in reproduction and women in gynecological health and how we can help women. And I had this real sort of ethical dilemma. And I sort of call it the angel sitting on your shoulder. And I sort of thought, it's quite a long time before we were talking about, Me Too. And she said the women in these imbroglios return to lives not so easily repaired. And I just thought, gosh, I really want to ask him about Lewinsky. Here he is talking about women, and I'm not talking about the most obvious one.
Woman. Yeah.
And so I talked to the desk before I left, and I said, right, shall I talk to him about Monica Lewinsky? And the desk was very divided. My editor, and I think my deputy editor, had said, go for it. This is what we want. It will be electric, it will be interesting, and it will be a sort of an astounding moment. And my producers, my US desk, had sort of said, be really careful what you're doing. This was not part of the deal. And his wife's probably going to stand. She could be the next president. And do you really want to set yourself on a path of destruction? And the BBC get us blacklisted straight away, before that sort of the 2016 had even gone. And what I've found out is you can ask a lot of people for a lot of advice.
Yes.
And you sort of listen to everyone, you take it all in, you go, oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, And then it all comes down to you, because you don't have anyone else. You have to work out the moment, and you have to work out the context. And so I went to meet him, and when we did the interview, we weren't in Delhi, we weren't even in Jaipur, we were on a goat farm about 3 hours north of Jaipur. It was a goat farm where we sat amongst goat poo and free-flowing sort of cannabis plants and ladies in wonderful multicoloured saris on the ground. And I thought, right, am I going to do it? Am I going to ask about it? And well, you can read that. This is my cliffhanger. You can see what happens in the book.
Yeah.
But there's this amazing moment where I'm sort of gearing up, and he comes out, and his minder comes out, and he says something which sort of puts the whole thing in context. He says, and he puts his arms round us. And I remember this phrase he used. He goes, between us girls, right? Between us girls, the president had a funny turn this morning. And I think, oh. And he's like, so I want to pull the interview. And I was like, oh, I can't come, 6,000 miles, 3 days of filming to have the interview, but I cannot go back with no interview. And he goes, so you've got to promise me something. If he faints or worse on camera, we're seizing the tape, right? And I'm thinking, what does he mean worse? Is he telling us that he thinks
the girl who
the
killed
guy's
the president, right.
the president's gonna die on camera, you know? And then you suddenly think that the extraordinary thing is, and I write about it in the book, you think you've got, you know, those kids' books where it's like, what do? You know, do you go ahead with the interview? Turn to page 76. Or do you stand up to the minder? Turn to page 42. And you sort of think you have these choices. You don't. It's a very weird, simple thing. Because actually, if I'd said, no, I can't let you seize the tape, I'm a BBC journalist, you don't get the interview. You know, so you've lost the game anywhere.
You're fascinating on that, on both the conflict between, you know, there's always the thing that somebody wants to talk about and the question the journalist wants to ask, which might be
Always
the thing that they last thing they want to talk about.
Yeah.
And also that moment, I loved reading about how you said you do the interview that you're getting on the day. You know, that thing, there's only so much you can plan, there's what's going to... I thought that there's a very interesting... Sorry.
Go on.
No, I was just going to talk about Sheryl Sandberg, but were you?
Well, no, I mean that's an example. So the Sheryl Sandberg one was an exact example of that, where she was a woman in extraordinary grief because she'd lost her husband in this tragic accident, you know, in a gym that she describes in her book, and she was also the chief operating officer of Facebook just after the 2016 election, when a lot of questions were going around about fake news and about the involvement or otherwise that Facebook would have had. And so I get sent off to do an interview on the basis that she's just written this book about grief and about her husband and about how you make yourself stronger through grief. And it is a really interesting thing. You know, I describe it as having, my mum's a psychotherapist, and I sort of, again, I say there's the good angel and the bad angel. And on my one hand is my mum kind of going, she's a woman in grief, you know, talk to her about her husband. That will be really challenging, really interesting. Talk to her about that. And then I have my editor going, go on, you're a journalist. You can't talk to the chief operating officer of Facebook without actually asking how Facebook is chiefly operating, you know. And so you're constantly trying to work out your devils. And do you want to be the real professional who like just cuts through and gets a thing? Or do you want to be the person that is a human and that is trusted and that understands what this woman is going through, who's trying to raise 2 kids without a father? And so there's a lot of that. But, you know, when you talk about the sort of the interviews on the day, sometimes the best laid interviews go badly wrong. And sometimes the worst days suddenly just re-energize and go brilliantly right. And one of those days was when we were all talking about, do you remember about 2 years ago, we were all fascinated by chlorinated chicken.
Oh,
the best line ever that the media had for this. They decided chlorinated chicken was too boring, and so we started calling it swimming poulet, you know, which was sort of the new
glamorous
one. Yeah, the glamorous one. And I was in Washington, and I decided that I was going to go off and go to a farm and go and find the chlorinated chicken. And then we'd also got a bid in to be at the White House at the press conference in the West Wing. And so I was sort of really torn on what I wore. You know, the sartorial nature of these days is always quite a confusing one. And I was thinking, I don't want to go off to some chicken farm dressed in a smart little suit that's right for the White House. And neither do I want to turn up in the White House wearing a hairnet and wellies, you know, sort of thing. And so I'd sort of I was in a sort of smart suit, and I was thinking, well, I'll try and, you know, I'll go in my leggings. I can always change, all the rest of it. And we ended up in this press conference, first of all in the West Wing, and I was desperately trying to get a question in. And it was all about, it's a really complicated, like overly long question about Michael Gove, the UK Environment Secretary, has said that he would not abide by anything that involved a trade deal using chlorinated chicken. And, you know, can you imagine how interested the US press were in that? I mean, you know, they didn't let me anywhere near it. And my friend had sort of said, what you've got to do is you've got to hold onto the wall with one hand if you want to get yourself into the middle, hold on to the wall with one hand, and then throw yourself into the middle of the room and try and intercept other people's questions.
This is in that West Wing
in
press
the West
room.
Wing, the thing that you see on the
yes.
TV, you know, and it's a tiny, the James Brady room, I think it's called.
Right.
And it's basically a greenhouse. It's tiny, you know, and there's a very sort of set format for who gets to ask questions, and it's normally the, you know, the American broadcasters first, and you know, there's sort of exactly there's a sort of a hierarchy of how you do it, and anyway, I just got going, and I was like trying to get faster and faster with this. Michael Gove, the UK Environment Secretary, has said that under no circumstances would and every time I sort of started this thing, you know, I didn't get through. Michael Gove, the UK Environment Secretary, has said that under no circumstances would trade economy. Anyway, I couldn't get my question out, and I sort of left that thinking, I'm rubbish, I'm shit. What did they send me for? I didn't even get a question about the UK chlorinated chicken. I did got the shit. And I, you know, you beat yourself up the whole time. And I called the desk, and I was like, don't lead on us. We're boring. I got no question. Just drop us down the running order. We're rubbish, you know. And so I had Stu, my editor, going, really? I'm sure we could do something. You've got, you know, somebody, and you've got a guest, and you're in the White House and all the rest of it. And I was like, no, we're shit. Just drop us down the running order. Anyway, they drop us down the running order. I'm standing there getting mic'd up. And my cameraman's sort of focusing and looking at the light and, you know, the thing, and is it going to rain, all the rest of it. And as we're sort of focusing, he suddenly starts zooming past me, and I'm like, excuse me, I think you want me. And he's going off, and he's like, I think that's the mooch, Scaramucci, who at that time was the director of communications for the White House. And I was really impressed with Jack, my cameraman, because obviously, you know, he's the cameraman. He's just meant to know about clever cabling and shots and lenses and all the rest of it. And I'm meant to recognise the mooch, right? But I've got my back to him. Jack's the one that goes, he's there. And I summon up my diva spirit from the bottom of my soul. And I call out to my producer, Maya, this brilliant producer, and I just go, get him! Get him! Because I'm all wired up, and I'm sort of thinking, well, I can't move because I'll miss my slot, and get him! And then sort of she runs off, beautiful woman with sort of pre-Afro-like hair, like sort of flowing out behind her. And then I realise I am looking a bit stupid, a bit of a diva. So I unmic, and I've got this sort of my mic lead trailing off behind me, and I run off after her, forgetting that actually they might come to us because we're actually on air at this point. And I grab Scaramucci with Maya, and we say, you need to come on Newsnight, you need to come on Newsnight, come on Newsnight, come on Newsnight. And we sort of hold his hand, grab his hand. All the people who spent the sort of day watching that and thinking that he'd been really handsy and sort of touchy didn't realise that actually I was holding his hand so firmly because I didn't want him to let go. And that it was only when we actually got the microphone on him, which is our TV equivalent of, you know, the handcuff, you know, that I could let go. And so all those people who kind of thought that he was doing this didn't realise that actually it was a grip. My grip was an absolute iron grip on him, and I wouldn't let him go. And so he came on air, don't know why, still to this day, and they gave it loads of time, and it was quite an extraordinary moment because he was literally in the job of White House comms at that moment, and he'd only had the job 3 days. As it turns out, he only had it 3 more. But anyway, there was that wonderful moment where he's sort of saying ridiculous things, and he's not really prepped, because how could he be? And I said, why does Donald Trump get away with calling other people elitist? That's the biggest joke. I say he's a businessman, he's a Hollywood this, he's a mogul this, he's a president. You can't carry on calling everyone else elitist. And he says, Emily, the president's not elitist. And I was like, not elitist. And he says the best line, he eats hamburgers, he eats pizza. And I was like, what? That's my favourite question ever for anyone. Just, what? Anyway, at the end of it, he starts apologising. He goes, I'm sorry if I called you elitist. No, he tells me that I'm elitist and that I don't understand because I'm elitist. And at the end, he starts saying, I'm sorry I called you elitist. I'm sorry I called you elitist. You know what? It's hard for me. I grew up in Queens. My dad, he went deaf. He was in construction. He went deaf from the sound of the cranes in the building. Do you know how that makes me feel? And I said, lucky. And he went, guilty. I feel guilty. I feel guilty every day that I've got all this. And he's sort of gesturing to like, the taxpayer-funded White House and gardens. I was like, oh, I didn't know that was yours. Anyway, I'm struggling and I'm trying to make him feel better. So I say, I know, I get it, because I myself grew up in Sheffield, right? From nowhere. I grew up in Sheffield and we had the miners' strike, the miners' strike. And then I think, oh, I better get something, popular culture. I say, have you watched the Full Monty, or Billy Elliot? And he goes, yes, I've seen Billy Elliot, the musical. And I'm like, I won't tell him it was actually County Durham, because that will kill the moment. And so I start sort of trying to find common ground with this man who feels guilty for owning, apparently, the White House. And even though I grew up in Sheffield, I've actually never been down a mine. And, most of the popular culture wasn't set there. And so I sort of find myself trying to sort of, even after the cameras have stopped rolling, you sort of make amends and you're like, is everything okay? Is it all right? Never asked him about chlorinated chicken, as it turns out.
There was something rather charming about the way that he was so unprepared, though. He just sort of spoke, but on Sheffield, I was fascinated by your parents, father professor of chemistry and your mother a psychotherapist, and I kept thinking, that's Emily. She's got this forensic brain with this, raft of psychological insight. Plus, she's an English graduate. She loves words, and I thought, what a sort of unique sort of person you are. Will you tell us a bit about how you grew up? You're Canadian-born.
Yeah, Canadian.
Cambridge.
Canadian-born. Grew up in Sheffield.
How do you get?
I just remember people saying
as a child.
My father has the biggest influence on my father, on my life from my father, is that he always shut me up when the Pips were playing, as in the bongs on the news or the Pips on Radio 4. And I now do it to my kids, and it's a really terrible thing. So you start a conversation and go, shh. The Pips, bing, bing. And now I do it to my kids now, and it's a sort of terrible thing because I listen to the news the whole time. So the chance of between sort of 10 to 7 and 7 o'clock, something massive happening, is quite small. But if my kids start talking at 7 in the morning, I'm like, what are you doing? It's the Pips. Can you not hear? The Pips. Anything could be about to happen. We're going to be told what the news is now. And there's, this is a terrible thing. I was telling Andrew Roberts last night that sometimes you do this thing, and I think all of us everyone does it a bit. You try and stereo your ears, and so you're sitting there listening to your son or your child telling you about their day and the football and the goals, and you're also trying to listen to the sort of Jeremy Corbyn speech in Salford. And there was a moment 2 weeks ago, I just sort of remember. And my son's coming back, and he's really excited, and he's all the rest of it, and I'm thinking, I've got to go off to work, and I've got to listen, I've got to make sure I understand about the Brexit position and the Labour and the thing, and he's talking about all the other policies that Labour will be rolling out, and don't just talk about Brexit, talk about this and all the rest of it. And my son's telling me about his football and FIFA and the day and and he finally sort of realises that I'm kind of doing this thing where I'm sort of trying to listen to Jeremy Corbyn. He goes, Mum, can we turn that down? And I go, oh, of course, as if I, hadn't even realised it was on. I was like, of course, you have my full attention. Turn down the sound, and I turn round to him, and I go, so go on, fibre optic cable rollout. And he goes, what? And I say, you just talked about the fibre optic cable broadband rollout. And he's like, no, that was Jeremy Corbyn. And I suddenly realised that my stereo channels have got mixed up. And I should have turned to him and said, so you scored the fantastic header, but actually I've taken the stuff from the TV and the politician, and I've sort of got my wires crossed, and I've ended up, proving. And that is the terrible moment where you bring too much news home, and you bring too much sort of political chat and all the rest of it home, and you sort of miss the amazing things that are going on right in your house.
Talking of which, lots of people get very wound up by what's going on at the moment, and you watch the news and it makes your heart race. So God knows how you feel when we're in that. So how do you kind of sleep and then prepare? Because when you're on screen, you're always sort of totally in the moment, concentrating, and then you have to go home. And how does it affect the rest of your life, and how do you manage? Because you always look amazing and sort of like your brain is in the right place.
I feel, it's funny because we finish on air at 11:30.
Yeah.
But inevitably, you don't sort of come down until about 1. And so actually, I get home and then we're all chattering still. We're all talking.
Do you really answer emails from viewers?
Sometimes I do. Yeah, sometimes I do.
Are they
find
friendly
it really
or?
helpful.
I mean,
I find that if people write you something very angry, and you can explain the background of what you did, it really helps actually.
Right.
Because people don't expect it. They want to fire off an angry email at what they think is a blank wall. And if you go, I'm not a blank wall, and maybe we did get that wrong, or maybe we should have given that longer, or maybe, I didn't mean to cut so-and-so off, but actually I was told in my ear that the line was about to go down, so I had to end it before it went to, black or whatever. Sometimes you help people understand, and that's really, it's good. And then they wake up the next morning and they go, oh, I was so surprised you're a human being. So I sort of think that's helpful. But half the time you're just there's always a little bit of vodka on ice.
Vodka
at the end
and
of the day.
hay fever tablets, wasn't that your thing? Antihistamine.
Don't
Nice.
tell
I thought
everyone,
that was
don't tell
inspiring.
everyone. There'll be a run on them.
Combination.
No, Pirates is a really, really good, sort of lovely thing in my life. And a little sort of, a little sort of chaser or something. But
I like that.
actually, we all talk, because the only people up at sort of 1 a.m. are all your colleagues.
So do you dissect it afterwards?
We all dissect it.
How? On the phone or by?
A bit of everything.
Or do you all meet afterwards in a room? Or
we meet after. We have a download, a debrief, in the room where we go, that worked, that didn't.
Right.
We're pretty honest. Not as honest in the days of Ian Katz, my last editor.
Yeah.
He'd sort of sit there with his knees and he'd go, yeah, that didn't work, did it?
Oh.
And it was quite sort of,
oh God.
He'd just sort of go, yeah, no, that didn't work, did it? And you'd sort of all be left thinking, oh God, what happens now? But we tend to be quite honest about the things that have worked and the things that haven't, and what you'd want to do. One of the, I suppose the secret, the big discovery for me has been that we used to rush everything. We used to try and get, an interview done in sort of 3 or 4 minutes, and then another interview done, another interview, and you end up with a lot of frustrated politicians and viewers. And actually, as soon as you realise that actually whatever we say about Twitter taking people's concentration away, actually, if you just give an interview a bit more time, that's my feeling anyway. If you give people longer, if you actually have the chance to sort of let people make their case, they don't mind hard questions, they just mind not
interruptions. Not even. Right.
I think the point is you don't, sometimes you have to interrupt because actually there are monologues.
Right.
There are,
Okay.
you can try not interrupting somebody and an answer will be about 20 minutes long.
Right.
So you have to sort of constantly weigh that. But I think, the truth is that you want people to feel that they have had the chance to make their case without you going, we're running out, the clock's against us, we're running out. If you just take the clock away and say, right, we're going to have a discussion that lasts 10 minutes now instead of 4 minutes, it tends to, for my money, it tends to work a lot better.
Yeah, sure. So you're the kind of midnight sort of news owl, and then what does the day look like? What happens the next morning?
This is so boring. I feel at this point. No,
no, it's not. I think it's...
I tend to wake up. I love listening to Norman Smith at 6:35. So that's
you wake up that early, even though you haven't gone to bed.
My husband gets up quite early, and then my son kind of jumps into bed for a cuddle, and we sort of listen to things with me going shh, shh, in the wrong places, and then he goes off, and I go off for a run and a swim with my girlfriends, and that bizarrely all my sociable time of day is between 8:30 and sort of 9:30 in the morning, because I don't really have my evenings.
Right.
So that's all my gossiping time and my chatting time and my I can't believe it. Can you believe it? No, I can't believe it. Can you believe that? No, I can believe it. So that's when it all sort of happens.
Great.
That's when we get it all out.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah. Well, we might. That's absolutely gripping, and I'm sure people have got questions. Shall we? Hand up down here. Yes.
Yes, a fascinating interview. Do you feel the current political situation, is this our democracy working, or is this our democracy not working?
Interesting question.
I have to be optimistic, actually. I think it is democracy working. I think it's been really tested. And I think, here's my thought, is that if your slogan is people versus Parliament, then it helps if you make Parliament look like a madhouse. And the angrier Parliament looks, the more that people, you know, wherever around the country in their shopping centres can go, look at them, they're all stupid, they're all crazy, I can't believe we're paying them, I can't believe we're, you know, why would we have that? And that's really dangerous. And I think actually what you see is incredibly well-meaning, thoughtful voices within Parliament. And if we start sort of chucking the whole thing away and saying, aren't they terrible? Why are we paying their money? Aren't they appalling? Then actually we're doing them and ourselves a disservice. You know, we elected these people, and actually there are some really profoundly good, thoughtful, wise people who are trying to muddle their way through an awful situation right now. And so I don't want to say democracy's broken. I don't think it is. I think it is being put under incredible pressure, and I think it's working really hard to find a way through. But as soon as you join in the chorus, which is like, oh, Parliament's, you know, a madhouse, or Parliament's done, then you've handed it over to the side that says, you know, let's do away with that. We don't need representative democracy anymore. And I don't think we're ready for that.
Okay, great. Next one. Kathy?
What's your take on what's happening to Naga? Kate was just saying there was one complaint.
Good question. I mean, we were going to get on to that. So
So
perhaps you can remind everybody what happened, just in case they missed it. So.
The breakfast presenter who's had, I think, a partial complaint held up against her for her language around the Trump tweet about the Congresswomen being, you know, telling them to go home.
Go back to where you came from, and she called it racist, didn't she?
She was very careful in her language.
Oh.
So. But she said that she herself had suffered being told to go home, and she was invited, you know, at the hands of her co-host to discuss this on air. And from what I understand, I think the BBC ruling said that it was fine to call out racism, but not to call Trump a racist. Now, you know, I've tried to practice that in the, you know, comfort of my own home, like how that actually works. I think it's complicated. I think the point is that the BBC are trying to work, or not the BBC, the complaints body is trying to work its way through a semantic and linguistic conundrum. But they end up looking as if they have their sort of heads down in this Dickensian ledger of for and against, or good and bad, or
like
correct and incorrect.
W1A, doesn't it? It looks like an episode of that, really. So, okay,
I think that my worry is that the complaints body looks as if it is massively out of touch with what's happening in the real world. And that's if you have a woman of colour in a prominent position on a main television news outlet who is a presence but somehow not allowed to be a voice, then I think that is a very difficult place for a complaints body to be. And I just think, you know, it shouldn't be my colleagues, you know, people of colour having to come out and say this. It should be anyone and all of us who say there is a real danger that we are driving audiences away if they don't understand the rationale behind that. It's a crazy position to be in, because we are all fighting for audience trust at the moment. And however sort of linguistically delicate that their explanation is, that the ultimate effect is to make it look like, you know, they don't have faith in her and her voice at a time when people really need to see that, you know, she's speaking up about something that is non-negotiable on any level, you know.
Okay, interesting.
For the BBC. You and I did a piece on super injunctions once.
Yes.
I think for many years, the BBC, I'm afraid I call it the whitewash department. It if you can bypass the BBC complaints procedure and go straight to Ofcom, where I'm sure Naga, a friend of mine, is going to get a fair hearing.
That's interesting. I mean, I think, to put it in context, and I understand that these things are organic. 10 years ago, if you'd said something about climate change, if you'd said climate change was non-negotiable, you probably would have got your knuckles rapped for that. And now we're kind of like, okay, we're done with the deniers. We don't allow that to be part of the debate. We say this is happening, and the debate has moved on. I imagine that we're in that position where the laws actually have to catch up with the reality on the ground. Otherwise, the complaints department ends up looking left behind, reality and audiences and actually that sort of human connection.
Sure. Anyone else? Can we go down the back there?
Hi, Emily. Thanks for the talk. Do you think the current two-party political system is still relevant, workable, and ultimately sustainable?
I think what was interesting was when you saw Change UK try and come in sort of February, March as the new party, a lot of us were watching to see whether that would be a sign that there was an appetite to, sort of disrupt and sort of open that out. It didn't work. I mean, but by any sort of measurement, it didn't work to bring a new political party in there. I think two-party is not quite right. I think the Brexit Party has already, and UKIP have already had a massive, massive influence on what the Conservative Party has become and will continue to become. So have they become part of the political scene without any seats? Answer is almost certainly yes. The Lib Dems also have the power from the other side to completely disrupt what is going on in terms of, the Labour voters, Remainers from the Tory party as well. So I think, what we are imagining in an election scenario, for example, is that you could have a huge amount of churn and exactly the same numbers. You could end up in almost the same position with almost the same sort of hung parliament, but just different people in different places, which I think is sort of entirely possible. I mean, I think one of the big questions that we're asking now is, again, all about AV and about whether we have the right proportional system, first past the post system. But there's so much else to sort out now. You'd have to be pretty brave to say, right, that's going to be first on the list. I don't know. I think we probably are stuck with what we've got at the moment, but I don't think it's as simple as, red and blue.
Okay. Probably got time for one or two more. Where should we go? Okay. Just here.
First of all, thank you. I don't actually have a TV, so this is a bit of a revelation. I wanted to ask, there's a saying that you get the politicians you deserve. And I was wondering what you think about that says about the British psyche at the moment.
I think if you go back to 2017, what happens is that we've become a nation that puts a narrative on a result without entirely understanding it. So you look at something like 2017, when between them, obviously, Labour and the Conservatives got, I think, 80% share of the vote or whatever. So anyone who has been solidly behind Brexit has said, if you voted for Labour and the Conservatives, that means you were a Brexiteer and you wanted Brexit. Now, obviously, a lot of people who voted Labour were voting Labour because they didn't want the Conservative brand, or because they liked the policies and weren't putting Brexit first, or that they wanted to unseat the Tories because they didn't want that brand and all the rest of it. So I think what we tend to do is we tend to put
Post-rationalise.
We tend to put a story on top of a result, and then it becomes this sort of narrative that people use. They weaponize it and they go, but look how many people voted for that, or look how many people did that, or, you know. So I think, do we get the politicians we deserve? I think we are... It's really obvious. I think we're divided, right? We are genuinely divided, and I personally think that Brexit is actually just the beginning. I think you could take Brexit out and say, you know what, some way we'll muddle through. We'll end up with, you know, a deal or a sort of a different deal or whatever. But I think the divides are now going really deep, and they're really cultural. And it's how you feel when you hear the Prime Minister using the word humbug, or whether you think that a Labour MP standing up and talking about Jo Cox is inciting and using her and manipulating her name, as you know, some people have said, or whether you feel that she's genuinely scared and is terrified about her future. So I think I'm very wary of saying, you know, this whole line of they're all the same. They're not the same. You know, our Parliament has got an incredibly diverse range of voices. And I think if we start saying, you know, we're a bit fucked and they're fucked and we hate everyone and all the rest of it, then we're not doing justice to the sort of complexity of voices and attempts within it. So do we get the politicians we deserve? I think we are divided and muddled and tired and exhausted, and so are they. Yeah, I mean, it probably is a reflection, really. Yeah.
Oh. Well, Emily, run out of time now. Thank you so much. Completely got in. Yeah. Great.